So, I've never played Silent Hill. That's not to say I haven't played a Silent Hill, because I have. In my teens, both Silent Hill 2 and 3 did an extremely effective job of creeping me out and confusing the hell out of me in equal measure, and are still great to this day. I also played Homecoming, but it didn't really grab my attention, so I never finished it. And I know I played Shattered Memories at some point, which was like a reimagining of the first game, but I don't really remember much about it. Oh, and how could I forget my personal favorite entry in the entire franchise? Silent Hill Pachinko!
Hit the lever!
So, while I have some experience with the larger series, I have yet to go back to the original PS1 classic that started it all. You know, the one made long before Konami was universally considered the worst thing ever. I always meant to play Silent Hill. I even bought and downloaded it off the PSN store at some point with the intention of doing just that, but as the years have gone on, I simply never got around to it. But with it being the month of spooks, I figured that now, over 2 decades since its release, would be as good a time as any to pick up a controller, turn off the lights, and see what all the fuss is about, and I could always use an excuse to make more video content. For full disclosure, while this is my first time properly playing Silent Hill for myself, I can't say this is a 100% blind playthrough. Aside from having a general idea of the mechanics, design, and atmosphere I'm in for having played the sequels, I've just naturally picked up some things over the years. I basically know how the story plays out, as well as what to do to achieve the best ending. But as far as location layouts, puzzle solutions, and individual scares, I'm mostly in the dark. Please note that I will be speaking freely about the game from this point on, so here is your spoiler warning. I won't be doing a full plot breakdown, but as is the case with all horror games, if you plan to explore the small resort town for yourself, it's best to go in with as little knowledge as you can. So please do so before continuing with this video. To properly establish the story of this game, let's throw it over to trusted industry juggernaut IGN for the narrative setup.
By 1999, Silent Hill was keeping the nightmare of mansion crawling alive, sending poor Harry Mason into a scary house after his missing sister.
How can you cram so much wrong into such a small amount of time? Just... wow. At least they managed to get our hero's name right. You do in fact play as Harry Mason, but he's looking for his daughter, not sister, and he's not exploring a spooky house, but the entire fog-covered town of Silent Hill. The cinematic that kicks things off is kinda disjointed, and in order to have proper context for what you're seeing, we need to take a gander at the game's manual. Man, I used to love these things. Harry Mason prefers to take late vacations with his daughter Cheryl. This year, they've made plans to visit Silent Hill. Cheryl is sleeping in the back seat. Actually, she's very clearly in the front seat, but whatever. As a motorcycle cop roars past his truck. Moments later, Harry spots the motorcycle dumped on the shoulder. It paints an ominous picture. Suddenly, a shadow appears in front of the car. Harry turns the wheel in a panic. The car slides off the edge of the road and into a gully. Harry eventually regains consciousness. Cheryl is nowhere to be seen. It is unusually cold. Snow is falling out of season. Harry walks toward a town he sees in the distance. From here, you're dropped straight into the game's intro, and I feel a need to break down this whole sequence because I was caught off guard by its effectiveness. Quality introductions aren't uncommon in this series, at least for the earlier entries, because they're unique with each one setting the tone for the experience that follows. Silent Hill 2 begins with a slow, lonely trek through a fog-covered forest. Silent Hill 3 doesn't waste any time and pretty much throws you to the wolves at the outset. Here, though, there's a well-balanced mix of build-up and climax. Following after who he believes to be Cheryl leads Harry down an alleyway where the camera switches from a behind-the-back view to a more fixed, pulled-out angle. The way the camera twists and turns as you proceed deeper in is immediately unsettling, almost making it feel like you're being watched. The sky suddenly darkens as a siren is faintly heard blaring in the distance, forcing Harry to rely on the faint flicker of a lighter to see as he continues on. From this point on, the path you walk seems completely different, with so much of it covered in blood and other worrying sights, and it's not long before you come across this.
What is this? What's going on here?
But before you have time to process everything that's happening, You're immediately surrounded by deformed, knife-wielding, childlike monsters, and with no way to defend yourself, your only option is to run. Only to discover that the way you came is now blocked. With nowhere to go, you can only watch as Harry is swarmed and quickly killed. I legitimately find this intro to be pretty damn brilliant. It doesn't overstay its welcome. It establishes and effectively contrasts the difference between the normal world and the other world you'll be switching between throughout, and does a remarkable job of making you, the player, feel uneasy. The surprise and panic felt when these little bastards come out of nowhere and there's nothing you can do to fight them is very real. I think this might take my personal top spot for favorite introduction in the series, at least based on the handful of entries I've played. Since the game would be pretty short if Harry actually died right there, he wakes up in a diner where he meets Officer Sybil Bennett. Neither know what the hell is going on, but Sybil does give Harry a gun for protection and then leaves in the hopes of calling for backup. You're then set free to explore the fog-covered streets of Silent Hill, all on your own. To be brutally honest, I didn't really find roaming around the town proper to be all that captivating. I'll chalk up a large portion of this to the fact that this isn't my first rodeo, so I knew what to expect, but I also didn't find the enemies in the overworld to be particularly scary or threatening. If anything, I found them to be kind of annoying, especially these winged demon things that regularly pop up. Generally, everything can be run past, which is good if you have my mindset of wanting to save ammo, but I swear these flying jerks sometimes magnetize to your head despite any efforts to dodge them. Things do become significantly creepier when the town is shrouded in darkness, cause, you know, darkness be spooky, but since all the enemies are the same, the illusion wears off after a while. I'm not saying that wandering the town is bad, just not great. What is great throughout Silent Hill, no matter where you are, is atmosphere, one of the most important things to nail in a game like this. It's fair to say that, strictly speaking graphically, Silent Hill looks dated. Everything has that trademark PlayStation 1 swimminess to it, and Harry runs like he's nursing a botched hip replacement. But the ambience of the setting is not in any way diminished. If anything, the lower poly count and janky animations actually add to it. Sure, while beautifully rendered abominations coming after you in 4K can be perfectly terrifying, so are the visuals that make it harder to identify just what in the hell is trying to rip your face off, and seeing wall textures shift ever so slightly as you walk by them help add to an unsettling fear of the unknown. This is a prime example of technical restrictions actually contributing to a sort of timelessness. Further adding to the mood is the standout music of composer Akira Yamaoka. The music of Silent Hill as a series is incredibly distinct. It has a sound all its own that you'd easily be able to identify even when hearing it outside of the games. While some of the tracks have a more traditional sound with pleasant melodies and identifiable instruments, most are the exact opposite, relying on harsh industrial clangs and unpleasant distorted noise. It's not the kind of thing you'd jam to in your car, but when paired with the dark, dingy settings of both the normal world and especially the other world, it adds to the sense of constant looming dread. Even when you've cleared out all the enemies in a room and are just looking around at a leisurely pace, it's hard not to be on edge when that's accompanied by the sounds of someone repeatedly slamming their head against a piano. So how about voice acting?
Hold it. Where do you think you're going?
My daughter. I've got to find her.
As a PlayStation 1 game released in 1999, the performances are what you'd expect from a PlayStation 1 game released in 1999. Which is to say, they aren't exactly high caliber.
A 7-year-old girl. What, she's your daughter?
Yes.
The acting isn't anywhere near as hilariously bad as something like Resident Evil, with only a couple awkward deliveries that gave me a chuckle. My personal favorite is how Harry reacts to being shot at.
Hold it! Stop! Don't shoot!
Mostly, I'd describe the performances as sounding detached and uninterested. But what's so weird about Silent Hill as a series is that the odd, mediocre acting manages to fit right into the setting. Everything else happening around our characters is so strange and unnatural that the strange and unnatural way in which everyone speaks just sort of works, and I wouldn't change a thing about it. Given the game's genre and how old it is, it won't come as a surprise when I say that manipulating Mr. Mason here is somewhat clunky. But I don't mean clunky in the same way that people do when talking about, say, tank controls. Side note, provided a game is designed well around them, like, say, Resident Evil, tank controls were always fine, so those of you that complain about them are just being silly. No, when I say Silent Hill has clunky controls, I'm referring to input lag. There seems to be an ever so slight delay, like a tiny fraction of a second, between me telling Harry to do something, whether it be move, shoot, or examine an object, and him actually doing it. This was more noticeable in outside areas, presumably because there's more around that needs to be loaded and rendered, but no matter where I was, this bit of lag was always there. It never got me killed or anything, and it's a quirk you just learn to naturally compensate for over time, but it definitely led to me taking some hits that I feel I otherwise would have been able to avoid. The main gameplay components are what you'd expect from a survival horror title. You explore unsettling locations like a school or hospital, solve a few puzzles here and there to progress, and shoot various monstrosities that mean you harm. It's a formula that was proven to work well before Silent Hill, and it works just as well here. Given the strength of the aforementioned atmosphere, the simple act of checking every room in a given environment keeps you on edge and remains consistently captivating. The puzzles are engaging brain teasers that are just complex enough to make you stop and think without leaving you stuck for very long. The only instance I was left wandering around for a while confused about what to do was in the school. There's this drain on the roof with a key stuck in it that you have to investigate, but when I went up there initially, my eye was drawn to the blood next to it, so I completely missed the hole. Yes, I know what I just said. That just leaves us with combat, which works alright even with the previously mentioned input delay. The handgun you start with is more than sufficient for dealing with anything you come across for the entire game, though I did switch to the shotgun from time to time, mostly for variety's sake. There was never a time where I found myself hurting for resources. Not only were bullets in no way a problem, but by the time the credits rolled, Harry could have stocked a small clinic with how many healing items he had stuffed in his jacket. Because of this, the game as a whole is pretty easy, with my only death coming from not solving a late-game puzzle correctly. Bit of a beginner's trap. Melee combat is also an option, but it's pretty terrible. You're given a knife and lead pipe at the start, but I found using either of these to be a nightmare, as neither do enough damage to be effective, and you're vulnerable when swinging these things since you're locked in place. I quickly wrote off using melee entirely and didn't plan to ever go back to it. That is, until I found the hammer. Yeah, it's still kinda cumbersome to use, but since it kills anything in 1 to 3 hits, it's heaps more effective and far more reliable. I ended up really leaning on it and using it almost exclusively in the second half of the game, though I did so more as a precaution. See, I started finding rifle ammo on a semi-regular basis, but I never actually found the rifle itself. I don't know if I'm dumb or if it's just easy to miss, but I assumed the rifle was the most powerful weapon you can get, and I was worried that having missed it, I wouldn't have enough firepower to deal with late-game stuff. So to be safe, I decided to start hoarding ammo for my handgun and shotgun. And it was the hammer that made it all possible. Let's talk about how Silent Hill handles scares. After all, when you play a spooky game, you expect to be spooked. I've already talked about how strong the atmosphere is, which can't help but put one on high alert at pretty much all times, but what about the individual moments that make the hairs stand up? Well, Silent Hill does have a few traditional jump scares peppered through its 5-hour run, and while generally effective, they aren't what this game or this series does best. Having one of those winged demon things burst through a window is fine, if pretty predictable, but I think this brief blink-and-you'll-miss-it glimpse of it in the background beforehand is much more effective. The creepiest moments in Silent Hill are more subtle, and are often events that don't put the player in any immediate danger. There are a number of times where you're positive something is going to happen, something is going to leap out at any second, and it just doesn't. One example that really stands out to me happens when exploring one of the many bathrooms in the elementary school. that's all you get. You never find out who or what is crying. It's entirely left up to your imagination. Another moment I found weirdly unsettling was so small I doubt many people even give it much thought. The first time you explore the hospital, you take an elevator to one of 3 available floors. After finding that each floor is locked off and you're wondering where you have to go next, you get back in the elevator to discover there's now a button for a 4th floor. For some reason, this tiny addition of an extra button, this indication that the world around me was shifting ever so slightly, made me feel uneasy, especially since the 4th floor isn't exactly the nicest place. Now, I would argue that future installments deliver better spoops than this game, having sequences that have stuck with me after many, many years. But what's here is very good, and while my scaredy cat nature prevents me from playing tons of scary games generally speaking, I'll take this style of horror over constant in-your-face screamers any day. Silent Hill is a classic for a reason and holds up remarkably well even after 20 years. It does show its age in some regards, especially when it comes to controls, but the excellent atmosphere and creative terrors absolutely carry their weight. Without the nostalgia for it, it's by no means my favorite entry of what I've played, and I would definitely recommend Silent Hill 2 or 3 over it, as they improve on pretty much everything the original offers. But that doesn't mean the first game isn't worth experiencing. If you haven't already, seek out a copy, turn out the lights, and give it a run through yourself. I guarantee you'll have a good, emotionally scarring time with it. And when you reach the end, you can join me in proudly declaring that after all this time, I finally played Silent Hill. You know, as spooky as this game can be, the most unsettling thing actually happens in the post-credits. No, stay back. Ew, no, gross. Stop it! No! Ah!